So I'm Gabriel LaHue. I'm a soil scientist with Washington State University, and I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. David Lobb. David is a professor in the Department of Soil Science at the University of Manitoba. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Physical Geography from the University of Toronto and both a Master's and PhD in Soil Science from the University of Guelph. David's research focuses on biophysical processes within landscapes, particularly soil movement by tillage and tillage erosion. He is internationally recognized for his research in tillage translocation and tillage erosion, particularly for his advances in experimental methods and modeling. He is also a member of the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils and chair of the working group that produced the 2025 Status of the World Soil Resources Report that he'll be talking about today. So with that, please join me in welcoming David.
I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this presentation and you for attending. I will be providing a summary of the status of the World Soils Resources Report, which focuses on the major threats to agricultural soil health and productivity. And then I will highlight the findings of North America and concerns for the future. Let's start with some background. I grew up on a cash crop farm in southern Ontario in Canada. I studied earth and environmental sciences at the University of Toronto for my bachelor's. Then soil science at the University of Guelph for my master's and doctorate. While carrying out these studies, I worked across central and eastern Canada before moving to western Canada in 1999. This photo shows part of our family farm back in 1978. The image clearly demonstrates the impact of unsustainable soil management practices. You can see the extent and severity of soil degradation caused by intensive cropping and tillage. Severe soil loss on hilltops is widespread. This picture was taken right before my father converted the farm to no-till, and when he established the first landscape-scale strip trials in Canada, comparing conventional tillage and no-till. Over my career, I've carried out research and extension across Canada and into the United States, and in other parts of the world. My research spans soil and water conservation management, but my focus is soil erosion and its impact at the landscape scale. More specifically, soil movement by tillage and the resulting tillage erosion. And I'd like to give a big shout out to Roger Verseth and James Montgomery and Don McCool from Washington, leaders in tillage erosion research and extension. The goal of my research program is the development of sustainable soil management systems within agricultural landscapes and watersheds. The first time I became aware of the concept of soil health was when Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada published the report, The Health of Our Soils, back in 1996. Soil health was defined as the soil's capacity or fitness to support crop growth without resulting in soil degradation or otherwise harming the environment. And this report captured some of my earliest research on tillage erosion. We seem to see the term soil health everywhere over the past several years. Just in my work alone, it is a subject that I've taught in degree and diploma courses on soil and water management. In my work with the Red River Basin Commission, where I co-chaired the Soil Conservation Working Group from 2014 to 2018 and contributed to the U.S. Corps of Civil Engineers Soil Health Initiative as part of their water management plan for the Red River Basin. In my work with Soil Conservation Canada, where I serve on the board, and have presented on the status of soil health in Canada at their soil health summits. Soil Conservation Council of Canada plays a major role in the establishment of Canada's National Soil Health Strategy. In the Senate of Canada's hearings on the status of soil health in Canada over the past few years, where I was asked to provide testimony a few times. And in what has consumed much of my time over the past 7 years, the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, the ITPS, and under the United Nations Global Soil Partnership, the GSP. The ITPS has undertaken several initiatives related to soil health over the last several years. As well, soil health has been a topic of several of my presentations and publications, such as the article, A Few Twists and Turns in the Road to Soil Health, published in the ASA Crops and Soils magazine, and the controversial presentation, Demystifying Soil Health. On to the big report. The status of the world soils resources. It was produced by the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils and is being published by the Global Soil Partnership. Very briefly, the Global Soil Partnership is an agency within the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. It was established in 2012. One of the key objectives of the GSP is to improve the governance and promote sustainable management of soils. The ITPS is composed of 27 top soil experts representing all regions of the world. The main function of the ITPS is to provide scientific and technical advice and guidance on global soil issues to the Global Soil Partnership primarily, and to specific requests submitted by global or regional institutions. The ITPS advocates for addressing sustainable soil management in different sustainable development agendas. The ITPS is somewhat similar to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which most of you have probably heard of. The Global Soil Partnership has carried out many activities and produced many documents, which I've highlighted here. And these promote soils as a critical resource and their sustainable soil management as a high priority for member countries and their peoples. I encourage you to check out the GSP website and explore these and many other documents. One of the major activities of the ITPS has been the production of the Status of the World Soils Resources Report, first published in 2015, and currently being published for a second time this year. Over the past 4 years, a tremendous effort has gone into the production of this report. It incorporates the contribution from 275 authors from 72 countries across the 7 FAO regions around the world. In addition to contributing to the main report, each region produced its own report as a separate chapter, which I'm going to be referring to. The work of the ITPS was led by myself as chair of the report's working group and several other members of the ITPS who served as regional lead authors, such as Mike Castellano of Iowa State University. Dan Pennick of the University of Saskatchewan, my predecessor on the ITPS, served as the managing editor for the report, just to highlight the major contributions from North America. The report summarizes the linkages between soils and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Several of the 16 Sustainable Development Goals are underpinned by food security, creating strong linkages to soils. It analyzes the major threats to soil functions, provides evidence of the direct and indirect drivers of soil threats, identifies sustainable soil management practices, highlights several strategies to facilitate the adoption of sustainable soil management, and provides regional overviews of soil threats and the adoption of sustainable soil management practices. The 2025 report differs from the 2015 report in that it follows a management-based approach. The emphasis on management comes from the World Soil Charter, which states, soil management is sustainable if the supporting, provisioning, regulating, and cultural services provided by the soil are maintained or enhanced without significantly impairing the soil's functions that enable those services or biodiversity. And from the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management, which provide criteria for assessing compliance of management practices with that definition, such as minimal rates of soil erosion, sufficient surface cover to protect the soil, and optimum levels of soil organic carbon, optimal biodiversity, and minimize loss of land to urbanization. The 2025 report focuses on 8 major threats to soil function, or health. And in North America, we focus on 5 major threats highlighted here: soil erosion, soil organic carbon change, soil biodiversity change, nutrient mismanagement, and urbanization. Guided by the Sustainable Soil Management definition and the principles outlined in the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management, the regional assessments evaluated whether current soil management in each region is sustainable, that being the state, and how the situation has changed since 2015, that would be the trend. The adoption of conservation tillage practices has been a major driver of trends. The state reflects the effectiveness of management practices in place as of 2015 in preventing or reducing a specific soil threat, as illustrated with the states of soil organic carbon loss or change, where it varies from very poor to very good. If practices in place lead to the sustainable gain in soil organic carbon, or the state of organic carbon was good or very good, and no further gains of soil organic carbon were possible. The trend captures the direction of change in sustainable soil management adoption from 2015 to the time of finalization of the report, roughly the past 10 years, from 2014 to 2024. Ideally, we're looking for improvement in trend indicated by the adoption of sustainable soil management becoming more widespread since 2015, and hence the threats to soil function are being reduced. But as you can see here, the trend could be negative, neutral, or variable. There are two main or key findings from the report that are global in nature. One, a large amount of information has been generated since 2015, but is geographically uneven, and basic information on soil status is still lacking in many regions. In my opinion, the lack of good soil management information is very problematic. And what does exist is inconsistent and often incomparable for accurate assessments of impacts of soils. And two, erosion is the leading threat to soil globally. As well, the status and trends of many soil threats show no clear improvement since 2015. And I'm going to focus a bit more on the erosion later. And these findings are reflected in the report's key messages, which are alarming. Soil management remains largely unsustainable worldwide, with the adoption of sustainable soil management still at alarming low levels. Interlinked soil threats drive a degradation cascade, demanding integrated solutions. Scientific knowledge and sustainable soil management have expanded greatly, but this knowledge is not being applied at scale. When sustainability delivers quick results, farmers take action, but long-term social benefits need policy support. Even the best sustainable soil management strategies falter without the right combination of information, engagement, and governance. And I will illustrate the first three with my comments on North America. Focusing in on the North American region and the 5 threats we assessed: erosion, nutrient mismanagement, soil organic carbon change, soil biodiversity change, and urbanization and soil sealing, the findings were mixed and concerns were raised, as I alluded to earlier. What may be most surprising was the poor performance for soil erosion and soil organic carbon change, as indicated here, where soil erosion was only fair and declining, and soil organic carbon change was also only fair and with mixed results. In some areas, increase, in some areas, declining. Soil erosion remains the #1 threat to soil productivity and health, and there's been no clear improvement since 2015, as I just stated. In fact, there is a concern that the threat posed by soil erosion has actually gotten worse. So here are a few personal comments on this finding, since it's my area of expertise. The 2025 report better reflects the nature of soil erosion in agricultural landscapes across Canada. Specifically, tillage erosion is gaining recognition as a major cause of soil loss, in addition to wind and water erosion. It is clear that much work is needed to fully integrate models of wind, water, and tillage erosion, so they can produce accurate assessments of soil erosion for policy and programming. Assessments that can be used in analysis of crop production and profitability, first and foremost, and in the assessment of the variability of dynamics of soil organic carbon, nutrient status, and biodiversity. So what is tillage erosion and why is it important? In hilly landscapes, the variability of soil movement by tillage normally results in the progressive downslope movement of soil, like a conveyor belt, which results in soil loss on convex landscape positions, hilltops, and accumulation on concave landscape positions, hill bottoms. It doesn't matter which direction you travel, eventually gravity will cause the soil from the convex areas to accumulate and will cause soil loss on convex areas and accumulate soil in concave areas. Over the past 35 years, there has been many tillage erosion experiments and assessments, including the study in the Palouse by James Montgomery and Don McCool. All of these studies demonstrate that tillage erosion is a significant form of soil erosion. It causes high rates of soil loss over substantial portions of hilly lands, which are the majority of our croplands in North America. It is often a more serious agronomic problem than wind or water erosion. Tillage erosion interacts with water erosion, and it's a delivery mechanism for water erosion. Consequently, tillage erosion indirectly impacts or contributes to water quality degradation. And tillage erosion interacts with wind erosion as well as water erosion by exposing subsoil. Tillage erosion can result in a tremendous loss of soil productivity and crop profitability. In such hilly landscapes, it is estimated to be responsible for about 10% loss in crop yields and gross revenues over the field, therefore much more than 10% in terms of net profits. This is the finding of two major studies, one in the United States and one in Canada. As noted above, the adoption of conservation tillage practices has been a major driver of trends in soil productivity and health. This is certainly the case in North America over the past 40 years, and more recently in South America. But our understanding of what conservation tillage has been changed. In particular, with the recognition of tillage erosion and the importance of soil movement in addition to crop residue cover in the conservation of soil. Historically, the focus of conservation tillage has been on reducing primary and secondary tillage operations. But when soil movement and tillage are considered, chisel plows and discs can be more erosive than the moldboard plow. Seeding and post-seeding practices must be accounted for, as they, too, can be more erosive than the moldboard plow when they involve high disturbance and high speed, and when there is great variability in soil movement over the land surface. We have overlooked the importance of these tertiary tillage operations, but clearly they are significant. In some cropping systems, tillage erosion caused by these tertiary tillage practices can exceed that of primary and secondary tillage combined, specifically when you're talking about potato production. If there is backsliding in conservation tillage, it is likely the result of in-season and post-harvest practices that disturb and displace the soil, such as vertical tillage. Again, a form of tertiary tillage. Vertical tillage is now being used within so-called no-till systems. I know even our family farm, which I've got noted again in the corner of the slide here, the farmer who is now renting the land and has just purchased the land this year has continued with no-till practices. But within his version of no-till, and many other farmers in southern Ontario, they include some form of tillage in the fall, specifically vertical tillage, such as what's shown here. So what does this mean for conservation tillage as we move forward? Our understanding of conservation tillage systems must be transformed, broadening what practices are considered to be tillage, and striving to reduce soil movement while increasing crop residue. Another reason for concern about this trend. As I noted at the start of my presentation, this picture was taken right before my father converted the farm to no-till, and when he established the first landscape scale strip trials in Canada, comparing conventional till and no-till. It became one field of many established across southern Ontario to assess and promote no-till back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. In 2022 and 2023, we resampled the soils and crops and measured rates of soil erosion using cesium 137 over the duration of the whole period to assess the impact of no-till on soil productivity. We expected to see more severe soil loss, indicated by lower rankings here, resulting in less crop yield, indicated by lower relative crop yield, and higher crop yields in areas with less soil loss, the good area on this diagram. After 32 years of crop production, no-till crop production, stable conditions should be sustained, and that would be the line here, A. Worsening degradation, that is more soil loss, should steepen the curve, that would be line B. And restoration, what we're hoping for, should flatten the curve, line C. But after 32 years of no-till, as shown here, the data from 1 of 8 sites over the 2 years so far, relative yield has not significantly improved on areas of moderate to severe soil loss. In fact, absolute crop yields have increased, the relative crop yields on severely eroded areas have remained the same or decreased. So what does this suggest? Well, more crop residue on the soil surface does not necessarily mean no soil erosion, nor does it mean more organic matter is going back into the soil to restore productivity. And my final comment, we cannot stop soil erosion even through no-till. We need to be creative in finding solutions to this problem, possibly the most creative solution, one requiring a deep understanding of the problem, and one recognized by farmers and ignored by scientists over many years, is the practice of soil landscape restoration, which is shown here in this picture from France. And it was published in 1953 by W. Loudermilk, which you probably have all seen that document that he produced back in the 50s for the Soil Conservation Service. The fact that tillage erosion dominates soil erosion in most cultivated landscapes where soil erosion is severe, and the fact that eroded soil builds up at the base of these eroded hill slopes, presents an opportunity to collect that excess topsoil at the base slopes and place it on the top of the slopes where soil loss is most severe. Now, although this soil management practice is very old, it's not widely used, but there's a growing recognition and interest amongst land managers. In fact, in 2021, in our Census of Agriculture, 7 to 9% of Canadian farmers have reported returning topsoil back to eroded hilltops. Now, obviously, it varies across the country. Some areas is much higher than that, but it is something that farmers are aware of and are doing, but there's no or very little research apart from our own. Over the past couple of decades, research has been carried out in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, Minnesota, and South Dakota. And here's some of the research findings from our early studies in Manitoba. The other ones are still ongoing. The addition of topsoil to severely eroded areas provides substantial, immediate, and persistent increases in net crop yield over the landscape. Increased crop revenues recover the cost of restoration over a short period of time, with a return on investment of only 3 to 5 years. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the related innovation of other farmers in tackling this problem, as shown here from the uphill plowing days that were done in Palouse back in 1994 when I visited. And we also see the same thing done in other parts of the world. There's a photo of a colleague of mine where we visited with a farmer who was doing uphill plowing in England as well, recognizing that soil was moving downslope by tillage and wanted to move soil back upslope through tillage as well. And with that, thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, David, thanks so much for that talk. I really liked how you were able to unify, the status of the World Soil Resources Report, but combine that with your own family farm experience and your research. I think that's fascinating. I personally was struck by how quickly, farmers were able to recoup the costs associated with the soil landscape restoration. And I think, that's not necessarily true in the case of every innovation or every management practice to promote soil health. And one of the key messages you talk about in the status of the World Soil Resources Report was the need for long-term policy support for farmers, especially for those things that take a long time. Have you seen effective examples of policies that do that for the long-term farmer support for some of these management practices? And do you have any thoughts on what those policies might look like?
Well, just a quick comment on the ROI, the return on investment for
Yeah.
that practice. When we did that, it took 3 attempts to do that return on investment assessment because no one would believe the results from the first two. So we kept doing it over and over. And that is a full costing return on investment. So it doesn't account for the farmer's time. It assumes that they're bringing in external resources to get this done. So it's an extremely conservative return on investment. But we also found that it very much depends on the market conditions in the year you do it, what the assessment is. Um, and it is concerning. Although now the government has recognized that there is no policy support, as an example of where there's activity but no support. So that's a very big concern. Where we have seen a lot of support has been the promotion of cover crops, conservation tillage, and I'm thinking back over the last 10 to 40 years since I was a soil conservation advisor as an undergrad student. Um, those have not always been effective. So there's often policies and programs put in place without proper validation, I would call it from a science standpoint. In other words, checking to see if these things actually work. The fact that we went back to the conservation trials from the 1980s and assessed them was astonishing to most people because that hasn't been done. But when we did do it, we did not expect the results we found that there really has been no improvement in terms of relative yield. I make that distinction, not absolute yield, relative yield. And that highlights a problem in agriculture and farmer adoption. In other words, whether or not you can implement policy tools. If you have um, a situation where you've got absolute yields increasing, because I will acknowledge over that same period of time, the absolute crop yields have doubled to tripled. That's wheat, corn, soybeans, whatever. But the relative yield on those areas where soil loss, which we were targeting, have not improved. So a 10% yield loss back in the 80s is still a 10% yield loss, but of a much higher value. And one of the things that we found in our economic study, which I did, and I think also shows up in the American one, is the cost of soil loss, not doing things well, has increased. It hasn't decreased over the last 30, 40 years. So there is a great need for better assessment of those policies and programs to create tools that are effective. And I think that lack of effectiveness, farmers are aware of it, and that's created maybe not necessarily a resistance, but a reluctance to accept policies and programs as they're funneled down on them from government. So that's
Mhm.
just a bit of a comment. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, you mentioned some of the policy supports that have been available for things like, conservation tillage or cover cropping. We've had a few questions in the chat about, the effectiveness of cover crops and whether cover crops might be doing a better job than, for example, reduced tillage or conservation tillage. And so when you talk about kind of those uneven history of the policy supports, and or the uneven impacts, I guess, of the programs to support things like cover crops, do you have any comments on kind of the effectiveness of cover crops in that region, or what you've seen from the policies designed to promote them?
Okay. So in Canada, United States, there's been a big push to put in permanent cover and cover crops over the particularly the last 20 years. And I know in Western Canada, I suspect the same is true for the Northern Great Plains states, that hasn't been effective. And I think people don't talk to farmers very much. And I know I teach that on a regular basis. And one thing that struck me is in the Northern Great Plains, Canada, United States, that we've had a history of summer fallow. And summer fallow is a soil management practice that's been around for generations, has been implemented as a moisture conservation strategy, trying to hold moisture from one season into the next. And farmers are not dumb. They know that if you put a cover crop in, you mine out that water you're trying to save. And so it's
Mhm.
been extremely uneven in the adoption of cover crops across North America. Certainly, I can attest to the fact across Canada. Whereas in humid areas, that may make a lot of sense to cover crops to increase soil organic matter. But in the prairies, the northern Great Plains, putting in cover crops, you take water from your cash crop and feed a cover crop. And there has to be a really damn good reason to grow the cover crop then. If it's not producing income, then you're robbing your annual crop. And so that lack of understanding about how these systems work has been a really problematic. And cover crops is a glaring example of that. And I think that is something that people should be very well aware of it. And I haven't talked to many people in the states, northern states, about this, but I know in Canada that's the issue. And I just talked to my diploma students, and my diploma students figure this out immediately. That they're told that 30% of the moisture for their annual crop comes from the preceding season. And if you grow a cover crop, you're consuming it.
Mhm.
And so, anyway, there's some lack of understanding of these systems, which really undermines those types of programs.
Yeah, it's really important to completely understand the system before designing the policy and also to have,
Hmm.
site-specific management practices. I know that's something we've trying to been stressed a lot. The same soil health threats aren't the same in every region, and
Yep,
the,
exactly.
the tools aren't going to be the same. We do have a comment from somebody at Washington State University who has a farmer that they work with who moves not necessarily soil, but residue from low ground to eroded hilltops. Do you have any thoughts on kind of the likely effectiveness of that relative to what you're describing with the soil landscape restoration, where you're actually
Yep.
moving full soil?
Yeah, because farmers have all kinds of interesting ways to do with it. Some farmers that I deal with, they take solid, and in one case, is solid hog manure from a hoop barn structure or solid beef manure, and they focus their application of manure on the eroded hilltops to get more organic matter up there. And I haven't seen anyone do specifically crop residues, but it doesn't surprise me. You get some farmers that'll bale up residue and they'll use a bale chopper and do it on hilltops. The only concern I would have is that requires an annual investment of that effort, fuel consumption, time to do it, because it's actually not moving a whole lot of organic matter, permanent or long-term organic matter. It's a small amount. It's important. It's not that it's of no value, but when you consider moving just a bit of topsoil back up, that will give you generational impact from one application. Whereas moving residue, it may give you a short-term, medium-term impact. So you have to weigh it off. If you are not robbing organic matter from the lower slope areas by moving the residue or topsoil, in my example, if you're not robbing it from there and putting it on a hilltop with little effect, then you're okay. So, anyways, it's every farmer will have their own little neat solutions for dealing with this. The photo I showed from England, where farmers using rollover mower plow, which I had not even heard until Roger Forseth invited me out to his uphill plowing day back in 1993 or 1994. There's all kinds of ways that farmers are doing this. I've had other farmers tell me they've heard about tillage erosion. They immediately went to rollover mower plows to shift the soil back up slope. All kinds of neat ways that farmers can innovate and come up with solutions to these problems. So it's an
Yeah,
interesting example. I haven't heard of the residue specifically, but it doesn't surprise me that farmers are doing it.
yeah, I think the innovation is always really impressive. I know our soil health ambassador from last year, I believe it was applying compost, but just, it wasn't feasible to do at scale maybe, but just to the eroded hilltops. I think
Hmm.
there's some questions about exactly how landscape restoration, the removing of the topsoil happens. I think you touched on
Yeah.
it a bit in your talk, but could you just describe the mechanism of that briefly?
Okay. Well, the farmers that we've dealt with have all had land scrapers, and it's a very common piece of equipment in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. I've seen a lot of farmers have them. So they're like 6 or 9 cubic yard scrapers, and they just hook them onto their tractor. And some of the farmers are pretty adept at just taking a nice thin slice from an area that has excess topsoil and applying a nice thin slice on areas where they need it on the hilltops without any additional work. They can just seed into it the next spring. So it's to get it there in the winter. The winter usually through freeze thaw, etc., breaks it down, makes it fairly mellow, easy enough to drive through and seed through in the spring. There was one case where one farmer was using front end loader, so it was a bit rough. So he would disc it. So depending on how the farmer is doing it, if they're doing it themselves, they would only do it. There's a key thing: they only do it when there's a dry fall. So in rotation, when the year is right, there's enough time and the conditions right for doing it. And they may have to, they obviously have to have a scraper or get someone to do it for them. And they can put it on the hilltop, and if it's too rough, they can disc it out. But it 5 or 10 centimeters of topsoil, 1 or 2 inches, makes all the difference in the world.
And I think there's a related question to that because I understand kind of from what you're talking about with the summer fallow that, moisture is a limitation in your region. And so there's a question, I think, that gets to that point about the dry falls, concern about whether maybe it would increase the likelihood of water erosion and maybe higher rainfall areas immediately after you've done that type of soil landscape restoration. Is that a concern in some of those areas?
Not a regular concern. You can
Okay.
always have an extreme event, right?
Hmm.
And I don't know if it'd be a 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 or 1 in 50 year event, but we seem to get 1 in 50 year events quite regularly.
Yeah.
So it is always a possible risk, right? But if you're trying to manage your soil for crop production, you have to manage it on a more regular basis than that. It is a possibility. I've never seen that being a problem. If because the types of landscapes where you're likely to get water erosion are those broad, long, convergent landscapes. Those are not likely the areas where you want to or need to do restoration.
Hmm.
It's those ones that have the short, steep slopes, like I showed in any of the glacial till areas of Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, any of those areas where that problem exists, water erosion is not generally a problem. We've never found water erosion or wind erosion to be a problem in those areas, but tillage erosion certainly is. So you have to figure out what is your enemy and figure out how to deal with the enemy. In some cases, it might be water erosion. In some cases, it's tillage erosion. If you move to eastern North America, where you're receiving, uh, um, 30 to 40 inches of rainfall a year, we found that the two processes, water and tillage erosion, work very, very effectively together to completely degrade the landscape. So dealing with just one erosion process is problematic. You have to really tackle both. And that's why we usually encourage people to take an integrated approach to dealing with soil conservation. So you have to think about water and tillage erosion. Figure out how you're going to manage both.
Great, thank you. And we only have time for one last question. There's some other great questions in the chat that we can answer offline, but I just wanted to kind of big picture final question. The status of the World Soil Resources Report shows that many threats are showing no clear improvement since 2015. Why do you think that's the case? And is there anything in that report or your interactions that gives you hope about the direction?
What gives me hope is we are learning more. And part of the reason why I think there is those mixed results and some negative results is because we are learning more and realize some of the things we've done in the past haven't been that effective. That's my opinion. Um, but I think as we learn more, our understanding will improve, our management practices will continue to improve. Like recognizing that vertical tillage is probably has very limited beneficial effect long term. Um, so I think that our understanding of management has improved, and I hope that gives us a path forward into the future. Um, but there are issues. One issue that does show up, one threat that is pretty universal, but we don't focus that much in North America, is the urbanization, the
Hmm.
loss of good productive soil. Um, that's a bit of a disturbing one because even with all the knowledge in the world, all the best wishes in the world, and best intentions in the world, for some reason, good agricultural land continues to be consumed at alarming rates through urbanization. And so there are some things that I don't think we can get away from the fact that they're negative and they will continue to be negative. But I would
Yeah.
hope that just basic soil management we do improve. Our understanding of biology, because I noticed in the chat there's some things about biology. And that's, as a soil scientist, that has astounded me over the last 30 or 40 years. I understand in soil biology. And I think that that will continue to improve and lead to better management practices, more profitable and productive topsoils.
Well, great. Thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. If your question wasn't answered during our Q&A, for the sake of time, we will try and answer it offline in the chat. But thank you again so much, David. I really appreciate your time coming here, and it was fascinating to hear your talk.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. And by all means, send me an email if you have questions.
Thanks.